Well, today we're going to talk about the Great Central Fair for the Sanitary Commission. The Great Central Fair was held in Philadelphia in June of 1864. And first of all, let me give you some background as to why there was such a thing as the Central Fair. At the beginning of the Civil War, the lessons of the Crimean War were well known throughout the world. And in the Korean War, a majority of the soldiers died from disease, malnutrition, or bad hospitals, bad medical care. Very few of them died directly of their wounds. So the Sanitary Commission was chartered on June 13th of 1861 by President Lincoln and the Secretary of the War at the time. A guy by the name of Henry Bellows was the president. Now, this is an interesting point. Its purpose was to inquire into diet, ill-cooked food, housing, generally unsanitary conditions of the battlefield and the rear areas. It was not chartered to do much other than inspect and report, and was mostly staffed with doctors for that reason. And it's another reason why the commission was largely unfunded. So it did not receive any funds from the general tax revenues. As time wore on, especially the women of the North realized that the Army was not really able to fully take care of their wounded and bivouacked soldiers. And so they began to collect donations for these people, blankets, extra socks, food, writing materials, you name it, all of those things that would just be very difficult to find on the battlefield. All right, so they basically accepted donations of goods, but then they ran into problems about, or the Sanitary Commission, which took them over, ran short of money. And so they depended on donations of cash in order to get these goods directly to the soldiers. And they found late in the war that sanitary fairs were a way to provide the needed funds. Sanitary means Sanitary Commission, and fair means exactly what you'd expect it to be. It was a fair, it was a celebration, it was a large social gathering, it was a place where you got together and you traded goods and you looked at things and you learned. We're going to look at the Great Central Fair today because it is the only one of the Central Fairs that provides all the collectible items that a philatelist would be looking for in a stamp issuing entity. So with that, I'm going to launch into a description of the fair. This is generally how we're going to look at it. The fair announcement and the description will come first. That will set you up in understanding what the size and the magnitude of the fair was. And then we're going to get into things philatelic. We'll look at the stamps, we'll do proofs and essays, we'll look at postal history. This is an example of the initial fair organizational circular. And as you found out from Scott's wonderful talk, in March of 1864, it cost 2 cents to send this. And this particular circular was sent out by the Committee on Finance and Donations. So let's look at what the organization announcement said. First of all, I'd note in the upper left-hand corner is the seal of the Great Central Fair. It's surprising. You see it on a lot of their correspondence, but you hardly ever see it on an envelope. So let me read. The undersigned members of the Executive Committee of the Great Central Fair for the Sanitary Commission beg to invite the cooperation of all their fellow citizens, especially those residents in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey, hence the word Central Fair. In this important enterprise, it is proposed to hold the fair in Philadelphia in the first week in June next. Note, this is March 15th. no pressure there. Now, we get a little civic pride comes in. By this means, Chicago has recently raised for this object $60,000, Boston $150,000, and my goodness, Cincinnati more than $200,000. Okay, now we're going to do a little emotional appeal here. That to send our national soldiers in the field supplies, thus to relieve them when sick and in misery, is a work of Christian charity. Carrying on with the charity theme, we therefore ask every clergyman to announce this humane undertaking to his people and to advise them to do what they can to further it. Advertisement was the principal backbone of the Great Central Fair. They asked the press to give wide publicity. They call on all the workshops and skilled workers, factory workers, farmers, miners to provide examples of their work for sale to the benefit of the fair. And if they can't do that, then should donate heavily. So everyone who can produce anything that has money value is invited to give a sample. Committees have been appointed in each department of industry and art. They left no stone unturned in identifying by business now targets to seek donations from. And oh yeah, by the way, what you know and what I know and we all know is that this thing would not have run without the women committees. The guys basically put their names to it, and they generally allowed their wives to fully support this, and that's how it was carried out. Okay, this is I said that this was a circular that was sent out by the Great Central Fair for the Sanitary Commission, but it was sent out by the Committee of Finance and Donations. And right there on the second line, first and second line, says appeal for contributions in money. Okay, so send money. This is an interesting cover. It's as we'll see throughout this presentation, this is a cover from one of the committees of the Central Fair. This this corner, which is actually a patriotic if you do Civil War postal history, was used largely by the committee members in internal correspondence. And in this case, the correspondence was, here it is from the Great Central Fair, a complaint that New Jersey and Delaware, who were contributing to the fair, needed to make sure that they got credit for what they did, especially since the fair was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and of course nobody trusted Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania, of course, didn't trust them, but in any case, this was resolved that the chairman of various committees require their treasurers, in presenting their final accounts to the treasurer of the fair, to place to the credit of New Jersey and Delaware all contributions in money and proceeds of all articles presented in their respective departments by the citizens of those states. We will come back to that when we look to see how the fair was laid out. The other interesting thing relative to Scott's presentation is here's a circular for 1 penny in 1864. And we'll get to that discussion as I get into the postal history. This is an example of a purple cover. And this one is important because it shows you that some of these covers had written on them on the back, send your goods to the Great Central Fair warehouse in Philadelphia. Do not prepay the shipping company to ship it. And oh, by the way, these are luminaries from those committees. They're all men, by the way. And this is nothing more than an embossed sticker. And this is actually a badge that you could sew to your clothes. Now let's look to see where the fair was in Philadelphia. They didn't have Interstate 676 in those days, so this is obviously a modern map of Philadelphia, complete with various parking lots. The fair was located at Logan Square. So the Great Central Fair was there between Vine Street and Ray Street, between 18th Street and 19th Street. It was a very large area. There was a park there. And right behind it or off to the east of it, is the Cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul. And we'll look at that again. This is what the fair looked like as an artist's rendition. You're looking from the northwest corner of the fair, so that you have St. Peter and St. Paul to the east in the background. This is the U.S. Military Hospital. And if you look close, you can see trolley tracks along 19th Street here and Vine Street here. And of course, throngs of people waiting to get in and relatively fewer people coming out. So let's have some fun facts. The estimated overall attendance for 3 weeks of the fair, it was originally intended to go for 2 weeks, but then they added another week. The fund raised over $1 million in revenue and net profits. The post office at the fair, which is mostly what we're going to want to talk about, earned only about $1,000, $1,100. This flagpole that you see prominently in this presentation is 216 feet high. This central portion of the buildings is Union Avenue, and it's 540 feet long, 64 feet wide, and 50 feet high. This was no small undertaking. The cross buildings, these buildings here, were all 500 feet long, 26 feet wide, and 18 feet high. I'd like to have those dimensions in my house. This is the floral department here. It's 190 feet in diameter. This is the restaurant, which is also 190 feet in diameter. It took 1.5 million feet of lumber to put together. It was completed in 40 working days at a cost of $85,000 then. So it's not a cheap undertaking. So what did we have inside? We already talked about the floral department. Previously, you were looking in this direction across the fair, this way. So we saw the floral department, the art gallery, and the kitchen. Here we have heavy equipment around here, stoves, sewing machines, dry goods, house furnishings. We had an area called relics, which consisted of autographs, locks of hair, curiosities, all kinds of stuff. Here were arms and trophies, which would be battle flags, muskets, swords, you name it. There was a school section here. And by the way, this is a brewery. Always thought that was pretty interesting. If you didn't like the beer, you could go over here and get your soda. This was the kitchen for the restaurant. This was a children's playground. Incidentally, these areas here that look like large rooms, these were all outdoors. So this corner here was outdoors. So it wasn't all open space. Tucked in here is the post office. It was a separate building, but it was connected to the passageway that took you to the floral department. And I couldn't point it out before because it was buried behind an artist's rendition of a tree. Okay, this is again an artist's rendition of Union Avenue. So you can see how high the ceiling is. What's interesting here is that the trees that were in the park, they built the roof around them. So that when they tore the building down, the park would remain essentially undisturbed. This is a season pass for the Great Central Fair. Cost $5, but it got you, and it was good for 2 weeks, and it got you in to all of the exhibits. Okay, now we're going to look at stamps. We're going to look at proofs first of all, and then we'll look at Chernikoff's essays, and then we'll do postal history. These are what the stamps look like. The 10-cent stamp was in blue. They had a 20-cent stamp in green and a 30-cent stamp in black. The reason for the different colored stamps was the stamps were principally used to buy an anonymously written letter that you would go off and read and enjoy. So it was like the goldfish pond at a kiddie fair. Everybody that pays the price of a ticket gets to walk away with something. Right? The purpose of the fair, frankly, the purpose of the post office, pretty much, and I think where most of their money came from, was that it provided stamps. These stamps were provided according to the value of the lines within. And the lines within, of course, were written by volunteer ladies. Okay, the subscription, pre-fair subscription was 4,000 of these letters. It's not clear what the 4,000 was, whether they were 4,000 names that people had sent money in that they were then expecting to get a written response to, or whether they were actually letters to somebody they knew that expected to be deposited in the post office and hence be treated as essentially internal mail. Let's look at the stamp. You can see it much more clearly now. You can see the values here, here, and here. These some gewgaws called shields up around here. It's generally middle 19th century bric-a-brac. And then it has this central vignette. And the central vignette is something you might or might not expect. That central vignette shows up on this Union patriotic cover. And the clue to what it is written below. The seal of the nation, the arms of the free, shall secession put down and restore unity. So it's the arms of the free, and it really derives from the seal of the nation. On this slide, you will see again the arms of the United States on a patriotic, and over here is the seal of the United States. If you envision the eagle going into attack mode and twisting around on the shield so that he ends up standing on it instead of having it on his chest, then you will see that he has arrows here and the leaves from here. Okay, and then there are the stars from here and the motto, E pluribus unum, from here has been put up to here. The only thing that's been added are these flags of the United States. Now, the vast majority of the stamps from the Great Central Fair are unused. However, there are a relatively much smaller number that have been canceled in the fair. And what you can probably see here, but not very well, is this one was June 20 something or another. This one was June 25th. And this one down here says Central, and you can't see fair because it didn't show up. So it says Great Central Fair over here. According to Cantor, who Bob and Marjorie Cantor wrote the book on this subject in 1992. According to them, and they had virtually all of the sanitary fair material that was out on ever out on the market in their possession, so they should know. They found that there were about 8 of the 10-cent fair stamps used with a fair cancel, only 10 of the 20 cents, and 11 30 cents. I hope that means that most people spent 30 cents because they wanted to get the best lines from their author. This was odd. It was printed on a sheet of 126, which was 14 rows by 9 columns. You were used to a 100 stamp sheet, 10 by 10. According to the Cantors, again, they say that they knew of 4 blocks of 4 of the 10-cent stamp. They knew of 10 blocks of the 20-cent stamp and 5 blocks of the 30-cent stamp. So here is one of the 2 blocks of 12, and here's a recently acquired block of 4. I got lucky. Now, if you there's also 1 or 2 fakes known, maybe 3. This is a fake on the right. It's a fake 30-cent stamp. And on the left is the normal 30-cent stamp. So the first thing is that it's the wrong color. It's on blue. It's not engraved. It's actually typographed. Bill Samus has another one of these. It's in a darker blue, and he has another fake that's in black that it just doesn't look right. In this one, the key to seeing that it's a fake is right down here in this ornament. You see how relative to this other ornament, it has opened up. And on this stamp over here, the real stamp, it's closed on both sides. There's also a color error color. So on the left, we have a normal 10-cent used sanitary fare stamp in blue. And on the right, we have a 20-cent stamp, Central Fare stamp, in blue, which is normally in green. Notice how close the two colors are. That's why we're inclined to think that this is an error of color as opposed to a trial color proof. There's only one known too, so that helps. All right, now we're going to look at what we call proofs and essays. There aren't any models known, that is to say artist drawings. There are lots of examples of the vignette on patriotic covers. We will show you some card proofs. We have a lot of trial color proofs. A trial color proof is an impression from the plate or die that's in a color different from what it was issued in. And we'll look at different kinds of paper. And then of course, we'll get down to what I call the Chernikov dies and essays. This is a ticket for a school child to get into the fair. Virtually every child in Philadelphia got to go to the fair, but it cost them 10 cents. They're all art. These are card proofs across the top. They're in the colors of the stamps. They're just not printed on paper and they're not perforated. They're printed on cardboard. And here's a lovely block of 4, which is a pretty rare item. Okay, these are what I call trial color proofs. They are imperfect, that is to say they're not perforated. They are on paper. And this collection of colors, running all the way from vermilion to black, through black, brown, purple, claret, so forth, is complete. These are also available in blocks and larger blocks. Okay, they are available perforated, and this is 6 of the 7 colors. Notice the perforations are pretty yucky, and it's particular on the 20-cent green, and they're, by the way, all 20-cent stamps. The 20-cent green stamp is badly perforated, and this kind of perforation is not at all uncommon. I think most of the 20 cents are probably perforated this way. Okay, they were also printed on something called opaque paper. Another way to look at that is that the opaque paper is really a thin cardboard, more like an Atlanta trial color proof. It only comes in 2 colors, this brown, orange, and this black. Both of these came from a canter sale. And then there's this nice block of 4, which I haven't seen before. There are some other experimental papers. This one's printed in brown on some surface treated paper, probably to prevent reuse. The stamps were available, the plates for printing these were purchased by Joseph Carpenter, the fellow that printed them. After the fair, the plates and the dies were up for sale just to make some more money. And remember, he had to contribute something that came from his place of work. So it fit both bills. But he bought them back. And what he did was he used the 20-cent plate to experiment with mechanisms for preventing postage stamps to be reused, feeling that if he could come up with a really good one, he could sell the patent to the post office. And so that's what's going on here. This is this particular pair is printed on double paper. It's punched parchment on top of bond paper. So it's a double paper. And you can see these holes in the stamp. Those were deliberately cut so that if you tried to soak this stamp off an envelope, the top surface layer would free and float away. So you wouldn't be able to do anything with it. There's another example of it. Here's what it looks like on the back. And there's a paper seam right here. So they weren't very careful about it. This is what is known as the small X variety. If you see here, you can see the small X's. It also comes in a larger X variety. We'll talk about that. Here's something, I don't know what this is. This is a dusky green trial color proof. I've seen a couple of these, but not many. Here's one that looks for all the world like a gray and green bicolor proof, so that these heavily inked areas here are in green, sort of a dark yellow green, and it's gray in here in the vignette and up here. It from here it looks like a bicolor. I don't think it is. I think it's some trick of the engraving and printing art. There is a picture of a block of stamps that look just like this in black and white in the Cantor book, and they're identified as double paper variety. This stamp is not on double paper. And I have another block of this same characteristic stamp, only it's in blue. Now, here what we have, of course, is if you're on the executive committee, everybody's after you for a ticket. There it is. We have, the good news about this ticket is you can get into all the departments, which means you can get into the arts, you can get into the relics, the floral display, and so on, without paying the additional fee that most people had to pay. This is an interesting token. During this part of the Civil War, currency was extremely scarce because everybody was hoarding specie, silver coins, gold coins, and even at the end there, copper coins were being hoarded, and the mint couldn't keep up. So people in private life would mint coins about the size of an Indian head penny, which this is. And on the back, on the front would be some advertising, and on the back would be, good for 1 penny's worth of stuff at our store, kind of thing. Well, it was copper, and so they tended to circulate, and there's a lot of different ones. So there's a whole collection possibility in Civil War tokens. However, the Treasury Department didn't like them because they weren't backed by anything. And the Treasury Department's competing product was what we call shin plasters. They were 5 cent, 10 cent, 25, 50 cent Treasury notes that were redeemable in large quantities for cash. So what the Treasury Department objected to was that the tokens were not backed by cash, and yet they freely circulate and operate as cash. He thought that was ridiculous. But anyway, an interesting sidelight, the reason I went through all that is this coin was made by the US Mint at the fair. What irony. Now we're going to talk about Chernikovs. If you collect 1860s and 1870s and 80s stamps, you know the story about a guy by the name of Ernst Chernikov, who bought the Philadelphia Banknote Company around 1899. The Philadelphia Banknote Company, at some point in the previous years, managed to buy Butler and Carpenter that produced the Sanitary Fair stamps. Ultimately, what Chernikov really got out of that purchase were the dies for making stamps from the Butler and Carpenter Company. So that he had, from the Great Sanitary Fair, he had 3 dies, and from which he could make 8 different types of proofs. That is to say, he could take impressions from the die using different kinds of paper and different colors, and then different types of paper. And then there were 67 different types and colors. So there were 67 total Chernikov die proofs. He printed fewer than 10 of each, and that makes them pretty uncommon, but they're really only uncommon if you're looking for a particular one. If you're looking for an example, they're a whole lot more common. Like, for example, the 10 cent and 30 cent, which shows up on one die on India paper, there are 15 different colors. So there's 150 examples of those out there. So they're not, those are, but if you want a blue one, there's only 10 of those. So you understand the difference as to what's rare and what's not in this. There are 67 different die proofs. I'm going to show you 60 of them. These are the die proofs of the 10 cent and 20 cent. stamps. These were produced on the same die, and this is the die sinkage up here. This was done on India, and I'm going to show you all 15 of the colors. Pretty, huh? These are impressions of the same die, not on India paper, but on colored cardboard. So this is a gray blue on yellow, which is hard to see, and this is a blue green on pink, slightly pink, and this is a yellow brown on white, which doesn't look all that white. But they're very faint. But if you have them in hand, they'll jump right out at you. All right, now here's the second die, and it is essentially a Great Central Fair stamp with no values, either in the value tablets where there would be a 10, 20, or 30, or up here where it would either say 10 cents, 20 cents, or 30 cents. Pretty clearly, this was a die that was created intermediately to producing the die proofs that I just showed you, and as well as the 20-cent die. So these, again, I have all of the colors. And I have all of them on green bond. There were only 4. I have 3 of them on colored card, and there are 6 colored cards. Okay, now we're going to go to the 20-cent die proof, which is shown over here. All right. And that 20-cent die proof compared to the 20-cent stamp here, there is a difference between the two, which is why this is termed an essay as opposed to a die proof. And if I blow this up, you get this picture down here. And if you look here, where the blue arrow points, you will see how wide the bottom is of the shield. And over here on the real stamp, the bottom of the shield is much narrower. So this is called extra shading over here. And it's a dead giveaway on the die proofs. So with shading, you have the Chernikov die proof, and without the shading, you have something else. So here are the Chernikovs. I have 13 of these colors, so I don't have all of them. And as I said before, looking for a specific one is hard. I have, I think these are complete. I have all 3 of these. And I have all 6 of these. Now we'll slip into postal history. The question is, did these stamps show up on letters, which we're going to call covers? So let's look at first of all, we'll look at correspondence within the fair. Remember, the post office was designed for correspondence within the fair. So you use a stamp that you pick up your letter that was either pre-written or somebody dropped it there. Okay, and if you need to contact somebody, you drop them a letter at the post office and you put a fair stamp on it. So let's see what we can find out about that. Okay, now you could mail use the US mail within the from the fairgrounds. That is to say, there was a mail drop that was picked up. So any US envelope that you mailed with a 3-cent stamp at the time, you put it in the box. The post office department picked it up and took it to the post office for free. And they did that because in 1863, the post office department converted from a carrier service, a paid carrier service, to an urban free delivery, an urban free carrier service. So that meant that you no longer had to pay a penny to have your letter delivered to the post office, nor a penny to have it delivered to you. So they took full advantage of that. Now, what we're most interested in, or what we would be most interested in, is a cover with a US stamp on it that was addressed to a place outside the fair. There are only 4 such covers known, way beyond my price range, so I don't have an example of it. On the other hand, you could drop letters at the fair post office, and you could have it postmarked for delivery within the fairgrounds if you used a fair stamp. Cantor identifies 14 covers, and I know of 2 more that fit that bill. There are 2 with a 10-cent stamp on it, 3 with a 20-cent stamp on it, and 5 with 30-cent stamps on it. There are 4 covers with all 3 values on it, by far the prize of the day, so to speak. And as a mystery, there are a modest number of non-postmarked covers, not a whole lot more common than the postmark covers, by the way. But they were clearly used at the fairgrounds, and I'll show you what I mean by that. In the meantime, this is another free ticket. This was intended for a invalid from the hospital across the street to get into the fair for free. So he would present this ticket at the opening or at the entrance of the fair, along with his pass, military pass for the day. Okay. And in this case, you can see that relics, floral, arts, and trophies, these different areas of the fair would be open to him unless somebody had torn off the corner. So I think it cost 25 cents to get into the floral, and I think it might have cost another 25 cents to get into arts. I don't know for sure what a general admission ticket cost, but that's how it worked. And I presume that what happens, you got in with this ticket, and if you went to floral, somebody in floral tore the corner off. This is as close as I'm going to get to a Great Central Fair stamp on a letter that was processed by the U.S. Mail. At CPAD, which was the 150th anniversary of the Great Central Fair, somebody that seemed to have had more of these than he should have had, put them on an envelope and had them canceled at the CPAD station. Note that in order to get that canceled, he had to put a current U.S. stamp on there. All right. This is one of the 4 stamps mailed at the fair from the post office with the cancels. So there's 2 more cancels here. Okay, and it's addressed to a Mr. Shipley, Newhouse, Philadelphia. So it's addressed to within the fair. It's got all 3 values. It's kind of a nice lady's envelope. It's not clear whether this was somebody's letter intended for him, or whether this guy bellied up to the bar with 60 cents and wanted the best lines available. Okay, now I'm going to spend a little bit of time on non-postmark covers. Well, the covers with fair stamps are relatively rare. A number of covers exist without the stamp. Why some would appear on envelopes stamped or canceled and some would not? Well, part of the answer, I think, is to note that the Department of Delaware also had a post office, and its purpose was essentially the same as the Great Central Fair post office. They had a group of anonymous young ladies writing doggerel verse that you could buy for 10, 20, or 30 cents or more, depending on what you wanted to do. So let me show you why that fact that they have a post office is documented in the history of the fair. Right. This is a cover to My Faithful Friend, the Postmaster, Delaware Post Office, Central Fair of Philadelphia. So it's clearly related to the Delaware Post Office. It's a 10-cent blue, and it's not canceled. Here's an example of a 30-cent one, also that is not canceled, and it's addressed to the Central Fair. Could these have come from the same post office? Is it possible that the Delaware Post Office didn't spend the money to get a canceling device? I don't know. But this letter is interesting by itself. Let me read it to you. While walking through the Central Fair and in the Department of Delaware, 'twas there a post office I did see. I'm sure I think there's a letter for me. So anxiously I gave my name to the fair ladies in the same. I received the letter with much pleasure, and paid 20 cents for the great treasure. Now I think from the tone of the letter that your faithful friend might write a better. And when you take again your pen in hand, don't give such a strict command. So he's referring to the letter he bought. Maybe. As for the Roman scarfs and French perfume and the rare cigars you say I consume, the first we wear, you see, for show, the cigars I'll go to smoke, you know. The champagne, sherry, burgundy, and beers are all very fine to bring about cheers. But from jewels, too, I must refrain, and also discard the enameled chain. Now that's unfair, for men, you must know, do wear the jewels fine for show, have plenty of sense and some to share. Now don't write nonsense again to me about dress, for I plainly see that ladies are more given to jewels and finery than most young men in this vicinity. Hoping to have an answer this evening, I subscribe myself, Sam Smith. I would like to point out that this letter, this enclosed letter, was on an envelope stamped with a lowly 10-cent stamp on it. I submit that was intended to be an insult to your faithful friend. All right. Now let's talk about Great Central Fair correspondence. This is official correspondence from the fair, business from the fair, and most of it we'll discuss most of this by the value of the stamp on it, and then we'll look at some that weren't originated in Philadelphia, because a vast majority of the covers were originated in Philadelphia, where all the commissions were. So this is the cover that I showed you when we first started, and I showed it to you again later when I showed you the circular. Here we have a battlefield with tents, soldiers. Here we have a wounded soldier with a rifle next to him. He's being tended to by Union guys, and they're getting supplies out of a box. Here's a Sanitary Commission guy bringing another box over from the wagon, which is labeled U.S. Sanitary Commission. So that cover, that corner, comes in a variety of colors. So we have black, violet, brown, maroon, red, and rarest blue. Second rarest is probably red. And the one color I'm missing is purple. And the difference between violet and purple, I'd need to have a copy of the cover. This one is being maroon, and on this screen, my screen, it looks purple, but it's listed in Cantor, and Cantor calls it maroon, so it is by definition maroon. If you write the book, you get to decide. Now we're going to look at 1 cent stamps. Okay, here's a 1 cent on brown cover, and I showed you this earlier. The key thing here is. See, it's postmarked Philadelphia, May 4th, 1868. I'm not sure about that 1868. The point is that it's a 1 cent unsealed circular rate. At this time, the rate for circulars was 2 cents, as Scott pointed out. It, however, turns out that in a city with carrier delivery, you could negotiate the 2 cent price. And in this case, the Great Central Fair has negotiated with the postmaster, that is to say, broke his arm, and he allowed that he would deliver their circulars within the city for only 1 cent instead of 2 cents. Here's a perfect example of that. Okay. Here's an example of a circular going to Syracuse, New York, which is correctly franked with 2 1 cent stamps. Here's one that is a pair of 2s on a cover, postmaster, addressed in Philadelphia. Okay, this is a letter. So this is an urban free delivery letter, the rate for which was 2 cents within the city of Philadelphia. It's got this lovely pair on it. This envelope actually contains a request for extra copies of a poem and a thank you note that came in this cover. So what the letter says basically is, dear Mr. Isaacson, you submitted a poem or read a poem, and we liked the poem. We'd like to put it into our scrapbook. Would you please send us several copies of the poem? So he answers it down here on the bottom. Okay, sent 16 copies. So the answer comes back, and we have this because Mr. Isaacson, or whatever his name was, retained it. Okay, it thanks him for the poems, and now it hits him up for whether he has any extra copies of the Daily Fair, which was the newspaper that was printed every day. Here's what the Daily Fair looks like. This is the last issue of the fair. There were 12 of these issues because there were 2 weeks of the fairs, and the fairs were closed on Sunday, as any good Christian would want them to be. You wanted a subscription to our Daily Fair, it costs you $1 from the printer. And that's advertised down here. I'm going to guess that if you bought this at the fair, it cost you 10 cents. What can I say? Now let's look at 2-cent stamps. Here's a 2-cent on Violet addressed to Greencastle, Pennsylvania. So this is almost certainly a circular letter, a circular rate. It's an unsealed circular rate. There are two items inside. Remember, you could send 3. Right? Again, this is officially from the fair. You have the Great Central Fair. And this letter, these were in the same envelope. This letter appoints you to a committee, and this envelope requests that you immediately report the results of your committee. I think it's cute that they sent both of those in the same letter. This is an interesting letter. It's a letter from Philadelphia, mailed to Westchester, Pennsylvania, with a 2-cent stamp on it. The person that mailed, and it is sealed, so we know it's not a circular, an unsealed circular. So we guess that the person figured that Westchester is in Philadelphia, but it's not. It's several miles outside of Philadelphia, in fact. So this is a short paid first-class letter. And being it's short 1 penny. And if you look right here, you can see a due to. So the receiver was charged 2 cents, 1 penny for the postage and 1 penny for the penalty. This was undoubtedly some kind of circular enclosure. It was at least folded this way at one point, maybe for filing purposes. This is a large business size envelope, partly to show you that there was a large variety of these envelopes. Okay, here's a letter for local delivery, and it is sealed. So there's a 2-cent blackjack on a nice red cover. They also had embossed mail, or an embossed indicia cover. So this is a stamp that was put on the envelope by the envelope printers, and it was used to send circulars to Rollinsville, Maryland. Now, it required 2 cents, first of all, because it's not local to Philadelphia. And the thing that I find most interesting is it's going to Rollinsville, Maryland. Maryland was a slave state. It was occupied during the war. And you have to wonder how they looked to Maryland to support their Great Central Fair for the Union. The key is Rollinsville is just over the border from Pennsylvania, so there are probably a fair number of sympathizers there. This is the only cover I've seen that actually has the Great Central Fair on it. That's the seal of the Great Central Fair. It's a 2-cent stamp because it's a local delivery. All right, let's look at 3-cent stamps. Here's a 3-cent on Brown. It's going to Pottsville, Pennsylvania. 3 cents. It's intercity mail. It's the right postage. This gorgeous cover is going to a man by the name of John Bachman, who was on the Orators Committee. And that is a maroon cover. That color is not coming across properly. It's got a little more red in it when you see it. Okay. Here's a double weight cover. Now, we don't know what was in here. My guess is that it was, well, it was one of the cases where they sent a number of circulars in one envelope and they paid the first class rate because it was cheaper. That'd be my guess. Here's another double weight cover. We'll find out in a moment why that was a double weight cover. Okay. There's a Committee on Labor Enclosure, so we started the show with one of those. And it explains that there are a bunch of circulars enclosed with this so that this guy can pass them out at the local courthouse because he has been designated the subcommittee chairman for the courts of common pleas in this town in Bucks County. Here's another 3 cent. This one is underpaid. It's an overweight cover with 1 3-cent stamp on it. It's got the due 6, which is 6 cents for the missing postage and a 6-cent penalty. That is to say, the postage due is always double the deficiency. Interestingly enough, it goes to Wilmington, Delaware, right across the river. A break. This is what the floral department looked like. I would go to a fair that looked like this. There's a pond here with an island in it, a bridge from the shore to the island. You can buy cut flowers here. This is amazing. Now let's go to non-local origin. All the previous examples I showed you originated in Philadelphia. Cantor lists 4 examples of that particular corner card envelope originating outside of Philadelphia. And he identifies Wilmington, Delaware, 2. Actually, one of them is a cover front. South Windham, Connecticut, and Trenton, New Jersey. The 2 other covers that I know of are Camden, New Jersey, and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So I think there are a total of 6. So here's a cover that was postmarked June 21st in Wilmington, Delaware. It's a postmarked in Wilmington, going to Bridgeville, almost certainly Sanitary Fair business because it's using the Sanitary Fair corner. So it was undoubtedly Delaware Department business. Okay, here's one that was postmarked in Trenton, New Jersey for delivery within Trenton, New Jersey, and it's 2 cents. So it's either a circular or it's a local carrier free delivery. And I'm not really sure which. I have to take another look at it. I think it's sealed. So I think it's a 2-cent urban free delivery. Here's a 3 cent on a black cover. And this one is postmarked at Camden, New Jersey, and is addressed for Yardleyville and forwarded at the 3 cent rate. And here's the last cover. This is a lovely blue cover, mailed long after the fair to John Bachman from Columbia, Pennsylvania. Okay. And I mean, from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's going to Columbia, Pennsylvania, which is just up the road towards Harrisburg. It's a rare color, it's a late use, and it's not in Cantor. Let me quote from the last daily fair. We are making up our 12th number and the time has come to say goodbye. Little knowest thou, O reader, of the long nights when we kept it up to broad daylight, of the wearisome labors performed around our altar, the imposing stone, which we now regard as our real Ehrenbreitstein, or broad stone of honor. But let most of that honor be given where it is justly due to faithful Mr. Johnston, our foreman, etc., etc. That is the end. Now I'm open for questions. Hope we have time to do some of them. Okay, David, back to you.
Yeah, thank you for an excellent presentation. I think you haven't been collecting the sanitary fairs for terribly long, have you?
I think for about 10 years.
Yeah, I think I remember when you bought a few of them, showed it at our local Baltimore, Washington group. We have a few comments, several from Bernard Bialas. He says that fair covers go back to the late 1830s. Some of these used borrowed post office devices, found at least in Springfield. The early ones did not actually go through the post office. The Civil War covers are different because of the reform of carrier mail in 1863, and the earlier fairs were charity operations. And he also says that the 1 cent negotiated rate at Philadelphia is known on non-fair covers, and there's at least one example from New York. Jim Milgram says that the fair cover you showed with an 1868 date is 64, not 68.
Good. That did puzzle me.
And then we have a question: were the funds used to benefit hospitals in Philadelphia? How were the decisions made to allocate the funds?
The funds were given to the Sanitary Commission. So the Sanitary Commission determined how they would be allocated. And so, some of the funds probably did go to Philadelphia hospitals. There certainly were a few there.
Okay, Jim Milgram has raised his hand. I don't know if we can bring him over, or maybe we can bring everybody over for a social thing. I don't see any more questions pending.
You want to start that, David?
Yeah, why don't we do that? I don't see any more typed in questions. We can just let people ask Mike or Scott directly.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would turn on your video, we'll be able to see you.
And also, if you want to ask a question, you need to turn your microphone on or we won't hear you.
I have a question. Is there any connection between the salons that were used at the hospitals earlier in the war and the fair connection with the fair? You know what I am talking about? The like the Citizens Hospital. There are 3 big hospitals.
Oh yeah,
Refreshment saloons.
I think the only connection is how much of a subsidy those saloons were getting from the Sanitary Commission. So to the extent that they were getting monies from the Sanitary Commissions before the fair, then they probably got some after. And I will also state that not all of the money that they made went to the Sanitary Commission. A large chunk of it did, but some of it didn't. And it's not clear from the records exactly where the rest of the money went. Certainly a large chunk of it went to pay their expenses.
Well, they gave a lot to the soldiers. I mean, they distributed their money. The salons, distributed their money to the people that were there. The soldiers passed through. They gave them money. They gave them food.
Not at the fair.
No, not at the fair. I mean, just
but at the salons, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know if that had any connection with the fair.
Yeah, I haven't found that connection.
Yeah.
Lincoln mentions when Abraham Lincoln visited the fair, he talked a little bit longer than he talked at Gettysburg, but not much. And he did mention the Union Volunteer Salon, and he mentioned the Cooper Shop. And so I'm sure that those people in Philadelphia knew what he was talking about. And I have no doubt that there were people involved in the fair that were also involved in those two refreshment salons.
I have a question. I'm curious. Menard made the statement that the fair started in 35. Is that the same sort of fair, or was it different fairs, or what sort of fairs were those?
No, I think he said that fairs as an entity, as an activity.
What kind of fairs?
They would be county fairs.
Okay, because I have
City
documents.
fairs?
I have documents that are that time period. That's what I was curious.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it.
I have descriptions.
Maybe Bernie will tell us, but
Can you
Bernard,
hear me?
yes.
Yeah. The famous one is the one with the beehive marking from Connecticut, and that was an orphanage fair, and they had a post office at the fair, and they had that marking. But there are other New Haven fairs that actually use markings that they got from the post office, and then there are a few others of these that I've found. And they have the same deal. They have these weird letters, which I think were done either by high school or college kids.
Yeah, probably.
There's a couple of comments have come up on the chat, Mike. Somebody asked what happened to the flagpole after the fair and all the lumber they used.
The flagpole was returned to the Navy Yard
Ah,
whence it came, and the lumber was. I'm sure the lumber was sold and reused.
probably.
No doubt.
Also, there's a question on the chat of whether these presentations were recorded and will be available on the Classic Society webpage. We did record them. This is the first virtual meeting we've done. We're going to try to figure out if we can host them on the webpage, but it's the first time around, so we're not quite sure what we need to do yet, but that's our goal.
There must be some questions. I was moving pretty fast.
Well, it was certainly an enjoyable presentation, and I learned a lot about the fair that I didn't know. A lot about I was aware of. I know you helped me write an article about for the Sanitary Commission.
Yeah,
about a year ago.
yeah, one of my favorite people, Louisa Lee Schuyler.
Yep, I like Bellows mainly because I have coverage from him. I think it's interesting the fact that the Red Cross, the first use of the Red Cross was by the Sanitary Fair people in '64 on the battlefield in the U.S.
And the U.S. couldn't join because at the time when it came up, the United States was anti-foreign ties, right? Didn't want any foreign treaties.
Well, it started in Geneva in '63, but they used the logo, but they couldn't use the designation.
When was the Cantor sale?
94 or 95.
I happen to know about that sale. Scott Treble bought the collection intact from Margie and Bob. I told them they should auction it, but they didn't listen to me. And he owned it when it was sold. It's a very nice color sale. Their book is very inexpensive because they printed so many copies of it. And I would advise any participant in this talk in buying a copy of their book because it's a wonderful book to read.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Mike, are you going to update it with all your new material?
Oh, not likely.
Come on.
I mean, we looked at one chapter today. Just think about that. One chapter out of the book. We may have covered it pretty well, but we only covered one chapter. Seth, Wade, did you want to say something?
No, sir.
Okay.
Just thank you very much. I mean, let me rephrase. It was a great presentation. It's something I didn't know much about, and now I know a lot more than I did before you started. So thank you.
Well, there are two commissions, the Sanitary Commission and the Christian Commission. So the Sanitary Commission is the one that's associated with the stamps.
Yes.
The Christian Commission was very important during the war. They distributed a huge amount of stationery to soldiers that used their letters and their envelopes to mail letters home.
That's right.
Yeah, Mike has a collection of that too.
Yeah, it all falls under the broad heading of sanitary, which means any benefit,
Benefits.
beneficent organization during the Civil War.
Yeah, Mike has a book that I wish he would take excerpts out and publish it, because I think it's that book that you about the Christian Commission that you obtained from me. I'd like to buy it back. I'd do the work on it.
Just borrow it back and do it.
All right. Remember, the only central fair, or the only fair, sanitary fair, that we could go into this depth is the Great Central Fair. And I have to admit that I got into it because I thought that the Great Central Fair stamps were really nice. They weren't all that expensive. And then I found out it was all an illusion, because there's only about 11 fairs, 10 or 11 fairs, and they that had stamps. There are a bunch of fairs that don't have stamps. The Cincinnati Fair that made $200,000 did not have a post office. Finding material related to the Cincinnati Fair is very difficult.
I have a question about all the essays and proofs. Is
Yeah.
it possible that all of those were published by that guy who bought the plates back after the fair? And so all of the essays and proofs may exist as post-fair items.
It's only remotely possible. I think the giveaway is the color schemes for the India proofs and the green bond paper and the colored cards are dead giveaways for Chernikov. I think that what Carpenter used the material that he bought at the fair for was to experiment with postage reuse prevention. So and that's where you get the double papers and opaque papers and stuff like that. He was in the stamp producing business. Butler Carpenter, they produced revenue stamps from 1862 on, and so they were obviously interested in reuse prevention, and I think that's what he used it for. I don't think he ever took the time to produce those die proofs.